I used to think I was lost. Not in the way you lose your keys or forget your way back home, but in a much deeper, more unsettling sense. It was as though I had drifted so far from who I truly was that I no longer recognized the person I had become. People around me saw me smiling, working, existing. But inside, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. There were days when I would wake up and feel as though I were walking through a fog. Everything seemed to be happening around me, not to me. Conversations felt like performances. Decisions felt like obligations. I began to question, when did I stop being me? Had I ever truly known myself? I searched for answers in all the places people usually do. I drowned myself in books, followed trends, tried new habits, chased after validation. Each time I thought I had found something, a purpose, a role, a version of myself that made sense, I clung to it desperately. But slowly, like sand slipping through my fingers, that sense of identity would vanish again. The emptiness would return, and I'd be back where I started. There was a quiet ache in my chest that never went away. It wasn't pain, exactly, but more like a gentle pulling, like something within me wanted to be remembered, wanted to be seen. But I didn't know how to look inward. I didn't know where home was, or even if it still existed for me. Then, one day, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come through a loud revelation or an overwhelming emotional experience. It was subtle, like a whisper. I had walked into a park, not with any intention, just trying to escape the noise. I sat on a bench under a tree, alone, letting the sounds of the wind and birds wash over me. I didn't try to be anything. I just sat, no effort to impress, no need to think, no urge to define myself. In that stillness, I noticed something peculiar. The heaviness started to fade. The fog didn't completely lift, but I saw a crack in a small glimpse of something real. I began spending more time in silence, not as an escape, but as a way to listen, not to the world, but to myself. And what I started to realize shocked me. I wasn't lost, not truly. I had just buried my real self under layers of fear, expectation, and distraction. I had forgotten who I was, not because I was weak, but because I was human. Life had taught me to survive, not to be. Through the teachings of the Buddha, I came to understand that much of our suffering comes not from being lost, but from believing in the illusion that we're supposed to be something, that we're supposed to arrive somewhere, become someone, win some inner race. But in reality, the more we chase, the more we move away from the stillness of our own presence. The Buddha once said, "You yourself as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. I had been searching everywhere for acceptance, never realizing that I had abandoned myself. The feeling of being lost wasn't a failure, was a message. A gentle call to come back to what had always been here. Me, not the version shaped by opinions. Not the identity built through achievements. Not the mask I wore to fit in, but the silent, ever-present awareness that watched it all unfold. The observer behind the thoughts. The witness of my own suffering. It didn't all change at once. Sometimes I still forget. Sometimes I still fall back into the noise. But now I recognize the illusion. I know that feeling lost is not the end, the beginning. To remember, I was never lost. I just forgot who I am. It began not with an answer, but with a question I couldn't ignore anymore. What if everything I'm looking for is already within me? It sounded like a cliché at first, one of those lines you hear in spiritual books or meditation apps. But the more I sat with it, the more it started to feel like a key. Not to escape, but to enter, to step inward. The world outside had always kept me busy chasing, fixing, proving, comparing. I thought happiness was somewhere out there in accomplishments, relationships, possessions, or even approval. But each time I achieved something or reached a milestone, the joy was fleeting. It would fade before I even had the chance to fully feel it. That's when I realized I had been living on the surface of things. I was decorating the walls of a house whose foundation I had never really explored. So one day, I stopped. I didn't know what I was doing. Really, I just closed the door, turned off my phone, and sat on the floor. No agenda, no goal, just silence. It was awkward at first, even uncomfortable. My thoughts were loud. My restlessness kept reminding me I was wasting time. But I stayed. Not because I was disciplined, but because I was tired of running. With each breath, I tried to notice what was happening inside me without judging it, I noticed how often I was not present, how my mind kept dragging me to the past or rushing me to the future. How rare it was for me to simply be, and it humbled me. All this time, I thought I was conscious. But I had been sleepwalking through life. The deeper I went inward, the more I saw things I didn't want to see. Insecurities I had ignored, pain I had numbed, fears I had disguised as logic. But I also discovered something else beneath all the noise. There was a stillness, a quiet, spacious awareness that wasn't trying to be anything. It was just there, watching, patient, undisturbed. It didn't judge me for forgetting it. it had always been there, waiting for me to return. That was my first taste of what the Buddha called mindfulness, the art of remembering to be present. Not present to an event or a moment of beauty, but present to the very essence of who you are. The inner journey isn't about adding anything, it's about peeling away. It's about unlearning the layers we've mistaken for identity. There were days I cried without knowing why. Memories I thought were buried came up. Emotions I had denied began to breathe, but I didn't push them away this time. I let them speak. I listened not with the intent to fix, but simply to understand. I was finally giving myself the attention I had spent my whole life begging the world for. One evening, after a long period of meditation, I looked at a candle flame flickering in front of me, and I realized this is what my mind is like. Dancing, constantly changing, but the flame doesn't ask to be controlled. It just wants to be noticed, gently. The more I watched without interfering, the more peace I felt. That was the turning point. I began to carry that awareness with me, not just in silence, but in everyday life. While walking, while eating, while speaking, every moment became an opportunity to come back to myself. Not in a selfish way, but in a truthful way. Because the more I knew myself, the more open I became to others. Compassion flowed naturally when I was no longer at war with my own heart. I started to see that the journey inward is not a luxurious, a necessity, we think. It's something we'll do later when life settles down. But life never settles until we do. The Buddha didn't teach escape. He taught clarity. And through that clarity, I slowly started to recognize what truly matters. Not what I have, but what I am. There is no map for this kind of journey. No steps that look the same for everyone. But one truth holds for all. The road inward may seem lonely at first, but it's the only road that leads home. I am still walking that path, still learning, still remembering. But now, I no longer look outside for direction. The compass is within, and every breath is a reminder. The way back was never far. I just had to look where I never thought to. I used to believe I had to be someone to be loved. Someone impressive, someone strong, someone who had it all together. So I crafted a version of myself that I thought the world would accept: confident, capable, agreeable. I wore it like a finely tailored mask, and for a while it worked. People admired me, depended on me, even envied me. But beneath it all, I was exhausted. It took me years to realize that what I was protecting wasn't strength, it was fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being truly seen. The mask didn't just hide my flaws. It also hid my heart. Whenever someone got too close, I'd shift. I'd say what I thought they wanted to hear. I'd laugh when I didn't find things funny. I'd agree just to avoid conflict. And each time I did that, I lost a little more of myself. The strangest part, I didn't even notice. The mask had become so familiar that I thought it was me, but it wasn't. The first time I caught a glimpse of this, it was like watching my reflection crack. I had just come out of a conversation with someone close to me, a conversation where I had, once again, avoided telling the truth. I smiled and nodded through it, keeping things smooth on the surface. But inside, something recoiled. When I was finally alone, I looked at myself in the mirror and asked, "Who are you pretending to be?" That question haunted me. I started observing myself more closely, my words, my reactions, my thoughts. And what I saw unsettled me. So much of what I did came from a place of needing approval. So little of it came from genuine presence. I was so attached to how I was perceived that I had forgotten how to feel who I was. Through the teachings of the Buddha, I learned about the ego not as some villain, but as a misunderstood force. The ego tries to protect us by building an identity, a structure we can cling to. But that identity is fragile. It feeds on separation, me versus them, success versus failure, worthy versus unworthy. And as long as we operate from that space, we are trapped. The Buddha called this illusion the root of suffering or the false sense of self. The more we identify with our roles, our titles, our stories, the further we move from our true nature. And that true nature isn't something grand or glamorous. It's simple, quiet, free. Letting go of the mask wasn't easy. It still isn't. There are days I slip back into it out of habit. But now I can feel the difference. I can feel when I'm speaking from my heart and when I'm performing from my ego. And every time I choose honesty over image, there's a quiet relief, like I'm finally breathing again. I remember one moment in particular. I was with a friend and she asked me how I was doing. My instinct was to say, "I'm fine," as I always did. But something in me paused. I looked at her and simply said, "I'm not okay today." It wasn't dramatic. I didn't explain or defend it. I just told the truth. She didn't pull away. She didn't judge me. In fact, she leaned in closer, as if my vulnerability had given her permission to be real too. That's when I realized the irony. The more we try to protect ourselves with masks, the more isolated we feel. But when we show up as we are, flawed, open, uncertain, that's when true connection begins. That's when healing starts. I sometimes visualize peeling away layers, titles, labels, expectations, until there's nothing left but breath. In that stillness, I touch something beyond ego. I don't need to be anyone. I just am. And in that presence, I feel free. This journey of unmasking isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And the more I remember, the lighter I feel. I no longer need to prove anything. I just need to show up truthfully, wholeheartedly. Because the self I was trying so hard to build was never real. And who I truly am has been patiently waiting behind the mask all along. There was a morning unlike any other. Sweeter, but because, for the first time, I was fully present to it. I wasn't rushing to check my phone. I wasn't already lost in thoughts about what I had to do that day. I was simply there, breathing, feeling, observing. And that's when I began to understand what mindfulness truly means. For most of my life, I had lived in a kind of trance. My body moved through routines. My face performed expressions. But my mind was somewhere else, replaying yesterday or anticipating tomorrow. Even when I laughed, part of me was still distracted, like I was watching my life from behind a foggy window. But mindfulness shattered that fog, not with force, but with quiet. It invited me to experience each moment directly, with openness, without judgment. It didn't demand that I change anything. It just asked that I notice. I first learned about mindfulness through the Buddhist teachings on Satipatthana, for foundations of mindfulness: body, feelings, mind, and mental objects. At first, it sounded technical. In silence, it became incredibly intimate. I began with my breath. At first, it was hard. My mind wanted to be anywhere but here. It wandered. It resisted. But I gently brought it back to the inhale and the exhale. I wasn't trying to breathe a certain way. I was just noticing it. And as I did, something softened inside me. It was an anchor to now. Then I noticed my body, how my shoulders tensed without me realizing, how my jaw clenched when a thought passed through, how my heartbeat changed when emotions arose. Instead of reacting or distracting myself, I just watched. I became a compassionate witness to my own experience. One evening, I was walking slowly through a garden after a long day. My mind was tired, but I reminded myself, just be here. The way my feet touched the ground, the sound of a distant bird, the warmth of the fading sunlight on my skin. Nothing extraordinary was happening, and yet everything felt alive. It was like rediscovering the world through the eyes of someone who had been blind for years. The beauty of mindfulness is that it doesn't require a mountain, a temple, or a retreat. It finds you wherever you are, washing dishes, standing in line, listening to someone speak. It turns the ordinary into sacred. It teaches you that peace isn't in the silence around you, but in the silence within you. But perhaps the most powerful part of mindfulness is that it helped me meet my suffering without fear. When painful thoughts or emotions arose, I didn't push them away. I didn't drown in them either. I simply noticed, this is sadness. This is fear. This is the tightness of anger in my chest. I didn't become those feelings. I observed them with kindness, like clouds drifting across the sky of my awareness. And something extraordinary happened. They passed. Not because I forced them out, but because I didn't feed them. I had always thought healing meant fixing or erasing pain. But mindfulness showed me that true healing comes from being with pain without resistance. There were moments when I sat in meditation and wept, not because something was wrong, but because I was finally allowing myself to feel, to be raw, to be human, without judgment, without hiding. And in those tears, I found clarity. Over time, mindfulness spilled into my speech. I listened more, reacted less. I paused before speaking. I noticed the tone of my voice, the intention behind my words. I became aware of the space between my thoughts, and that space became a refuge. It's not that I stopped making mistakes or feeling overwhelmed, but now I catch myself. I return again and again. Mindfulness isn't perfection, it's remembering. And every time I return to the present moment, I feel as if I'm coming home to myself. The Buddha taught that mindfulness is the path to awakening. Not a distant goal, but a moment-to-moment opening of the heart. And now I see why. Because when I'm fully present, I stop searching. I stop needing life to be different. I simply receive what is breath by breath, step by step, and in that receiving, I discover a quiet joy, a steady peace, not because everything outside has changed, but because I have. Because I've woken up, not in some dramatic flash of enlightenment, but in the simple act of being here, alive, aware, enough. It didn't happen all at once. There was no divine light, no dramatic shift, no voice from the sky telling me that I had finally found the truth. It came slowly, quietly, like the first rays of dawn seeping through a darkened room. One morning, while sitting in stillness, I realized something that would change everything. I was never really lost. I just forgot who I was. This realization didn't come through words. It wasn't something I thought, was something I felt. Like remembering a song I had loved long ago, or a scent that brought me back to a place I had once called home. I had spent so many years searching, chasing, building, breaking, always trying to become something. But in that moment, I saw clearly that everything I had been looking for was already here. It had always been here. I just hadn't known how. To see it, it was like waking up from a long, restless dream. All the masks I had worn, the identities I had clung to, the endless striving to be enough, they weren't me. They were stories. Stories I had picked up from others, from the world, from my own fear. And when I stopped believing in them, what remained wasn't emptiness, it was peace. I remembered something the Buddha taught: just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. I used to think that meant renouncing the world, becoming someone holy or distant. But now I see it differently. The spiritual life is simply the life of remembering, of living from a place of truth, not illusion. I looked back at the moments I had felt most disconnected, when I had convinced myself I was broken or unworthy. I saw now that those moments were never signs of failure. They were invitations. Each pain, each doubt, each breakdown had been a doorway, not away from myself, but toward myself. I just hadn't known how to walk through. There's a river inside all of us, always flowing. We build dams with our fears and expectations, trying to control its course. But when we let go, when we truly surrender, we remember that we are the river. We're not separate from life. We are life. This realization didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel tender, vulnerable, open. I wasn't some perfected being. I was a human being with wounds, with joy, with confusion, with clarity. And that was enough. More than enough. I remember standing in front of a mirror, not to fix myself, but just to look. I stared into my own eyes and whispered, "You're here. You made it." And for the first time, I didn't flinch. I didn't criticize. I didn't pretend. I just stood there in full presence and felt love for the person I had forgotten to love the most. Myself, not the self that others applauded or expected, but the self that had always been watching silently from within, the one that had never been hurt, never been lost, never been incomplete, the self that is not separate from anything or anyone, the self that is awareness itself. I realized then why so many great teachers, including the Buddha, speak of remembering rather than becoming. We are simply waking up to what has always been true. The journey isn't about gaining something. It's about shedding everything that isn't real. And when that happens, when the layers fall away, there is nothing left to seek, only to live, to breathe, to be. I stopped needing labels. I stopped measuring my worth by achievements or approval. I stopped asking the world to define me. I just lived, moment by moment, heart open, eyes clear. And the strangest, most beautiful part, The more I remembered who I was, the more I saw that everyone else was also just trying to remember. Behind every angry word, behind every act of selfishness or fear, there was someone who had simply forgotten their light, forgotten their origin, forgotten their truth. And so I no longer blamed the world. I felt compassion for it, for myself, for all of us, because we're not lost. We just forget. But even in forgetting, the truth waits patiently. It never leaves. It never judges. It just remains like the sky behind the clouds, vast and silent and endlessly blue. And when you remember, even just for a breath, even just for a moment, it's everything coming back to myself. Felt nothing like I had imagined. I thought it would feel like triumph, some final, victorious arrival after a long spiritual quest. But it didn't feel like winning anything. It felt like removing everything I didn't need. It felt like sitting quietly in a room I had abandoned long ago and realizing the light was still on, waiting for me. Returning home wasn't about going to a place. It was about coming back to a way of being, a way of breathing, speaking, and choosing that was honest and unforced. For so long, I had tried to shape myself to fit into the world, to be good, successful, likable, efficient. I had learned to please, to impress, to perform. But when I began to live authentically, those habits started to fall away, like old skin. At first, it was uncomfortable. Living truthfully meant saying no when I used to say yes. It meant pausing when I was expected to react. It meant not laughing at things that didn't feel funny, and not hiding my silence when the world demanded noise. I feared people would misunderstand. Some did. But I also found that when I stood in my truth, even quietly, the right people began to hear me more clearly than ever before. I noticed it in small things. The way I walked, the way I drank my tea, the way I listened to others without needing to fix them or prove myself. Life became simpler, but also richer, because I was no longer running away from myself. There's a certain peace that comes when you no longer need to be someone else. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Living authentically is like that. It's not about saying or doing more, but about aligning your words and actions with your heart. It's about being honest, not just with others, but with yourself. There were moments when I fell back into old patterns, when the fear crept in and whispered, "You should be more like them. You're falling behind. You're too quiet. You're too different." But now, instead of obeying that voice, I would sit with it. I'd greet it like an old friend, kindly but firmly. I'd ask, "What are you protecting?" And in that dialogue, I'd remember again, I'm not here to fit into anyone's story. I'm here to live my own. Living authentically doesn't mean I always feel confident. It means I'm honest even when I'm not. It means I allow space for vulnerability. I've learned that being real sometimes looks like uncertainty. It looks like taking a breath before answering. It looks like choosing rest instead of productivity. It looks like asking for help or walking away from things that once defined me. But the reward is profound. When I live this way, I no longer feel scattered. My inner world is no longer at war with the outer one. I don't need to chase meaning. Meaning flows naturally from the smallest acts, like tending to a plant, offering someone undivided attention, or simply sitting still under the sky. This return to self also changed the way I relate to others. I stopped needing to change people or fix their journeys. I began to understand that everyone is waking up in their own time, in their own way. I became less reactive, more patient. I saw that authenticity is contagious. When you live honestly, it gives others silent permission to do the same. And perhaps that's the most beautiful part of returning home. It not only frees you, it invites others into freedom too. There is a deep wisdom in living from your own truth. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the soft, steady wisdom that whispers in quiet moments. You are enough. You are whole, just as you are. When I listen to that voice, I walk lighter. I love deeper. I forgive more easily. Not because I've become better, but because I've become real. Now, I see my life not as a series of achievements or failures, but as a path of unfolding, a remembering, a returning. I don't need to know what comes next. I only need to be present for what is. This, right here, is home. And I carry that home with me, wherever I go, in the quiet of the morning, in the mess of the middle, in the unknown of tomorrow. I walk not to arrive anywhere, but to express who I already am. This is the freedom of authenticity. This is the joy of being whole. This is the return I had always longed for, and I'm finally home.